Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia. With your host, Ben Hurl.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. This week we're going to look at a very complex case which has a whole lot going on. And it really is a great example of how the UFO phenomena can impact upon individuals, animals, and a community. And it's also a case that is 95 years old. Yes, that's right, 95 years ago. And I was very excited about this case when I became aware of it again. I had heard about it years ago, but only recently I've sort of got back into it. And while that's a long time ago, 95 years, the events that occurred then are just as relevant today as they were at any other point over the last 100 years. And in fact, these events serve as a great testament to just how long the UFO visitations have been occurring here in Australia and around the world, and the consistency of what the UFOs have been doing here for a very long time is also very evident in this 95-year-old case. And as I said, I only really discovered this case recently, but in a much bigger way. I'd read some information about it, but it was only when I was preparing my recent interview with Bill Chalker a couple of weeks ago that I really got heavily into the details of this case. And I also got very excited about it, as this case really does have a whole lot going on. It has mysterious lights appearing in the sky. It has highly agitated animals. It has a strange being on a local road, among many other intriguing happenings. And that was just as an introductory teaser as to what awaits us on this episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia, Fernvale, 1927. So where is Fernvale? It's on the north coast of New South Wales, and it's an idyllic dairy region, very rural then in 1927 as it is now. Here in 2022, it's still just as idyllic. Except like all areas, there are more houses have appeared over the decades, but it still has a very beautiful country charm to the area. So I'll just show you some images of Fernvale. So the location is here. So it's right up very close to the border between New South Wales and Queensland. It's really not that far south of, it's actually closer to Brisbane than it is to Sydney. When you look where Sydney's at the bottom of the map and Brisbane's at the midway point, and where that little red dropper is, that's where Fernvale is. And zooming in a little bit closer, this shows you another location picture of where it is. So it's up near, just south of that Coolangatta Tweed area up there on right where the borderline is there at the top of the picture. And down to the bottom of the picture, there's that little red dotted outlined area. That's where Fernvale is. And interestingly to note that it's actually near a couple of national parks that you can see there as well. And I'm not sure if that has significance to it or not, but it's always interesting when UFO events are occurring around and in the vicinity of national parks and sort of what features are in national parks is very interesting. And you come in a little bit closer, and here we've got a much more detailed image of what Fernvale is actually like. It's almost like a little unsignposted little community, really just a dottering and smattering of houses around in that hilly district. And when you get down onto the ground driving along the road, this is sort of what you see in that area. So it's very hilly, undulating, winding roads, relatively narrow roads as well. And that's today. This photograph is a current Google Maps picture taken in 2022. So that's what it looks like. And despite that house being in the distance there, that certainly wasn't there in 1927. We'll go back in time now, and we'll have a good look at what actually happened. So there's very little on this case out there. You can Google it, and really nothing comes up when you hop on Google or YouTube. There's really no videos about it. It's really only been captured by one researcher, and that's Bill Chalker, who I spoke to a few weeks ago. In all his years of research, he came across this really amazing series of incidents, and he received a letter from a man called Cecil McGann in 1985. And this letter was about 19 pages long. So that gives you a bit of an idea exactly what Bill was in store for once he actually received this letter. And it detailed the events that had occurred in Fernvale in 1927. A very strange series of events occurred in this little region where you would not expect any such events to occur. And I wonder if there have been other unreported events in the decades since, quite possibly. Or perhaps is it the innocuous nature of Fernvale that makes it perfect for such events to happen? There was something there in that area that attracted all the strange activity. Now, interestingly enough, at that time, in April of 1927, the Duke and Duchess of York, later to be King George VI and Queen Elizabeth II's mother, also visited the Tweed district, which is the area where Fernvale is located. And a lot of the photos today I've got here are courtesy of Bill and the article that he wrote. And there is an image there of the royal visit. So there you have the royals visiting the area in 1927. And that's interesting enough in itself, I suppose, if you're into the royal family. So there was really two extraordinary visits to the region, one by the royals from Britain, and it's the second visitors that are really interesting to us here on this podcast tonight, the second series of visitors, much more interesting than the royals. It was like mysterious visitors from another dimension or aliens from another world decided for whatever reasons of their own, that Fernvale was the ideal time to haunt the locals, and in 1927, and their stock, and also to create terror and be forever etched into the memories of those who were there to experience it. Now, Cecil Danny McGann lived from 1917 to 2004, 87 years on planet Earth, a very nice innings. And in 1927, he was only 10 years old, quite young to be caught up in what was about to occur at that time. So Cecil was a member of a large family, and as families often were in those days, and the McGanns were share farmers. And like many others in the years before the Great Depression hit, they were, like anyone else, struggling to make a living. Money was tight enough, but life was still good out in the clean country air and the rolling hills of the small hamlet of Fernvale. The family was share farming on a 200-acre property, which is a reasonable parcel of land, spacious and ideal for dairy cows to thrive on lush grass in the area. Now, one summer night, Cecil wrote, and I quote this from Bill's article, which was called UFOs Exposed, the Historical Case, the Fernvale Prophecy, 1927. Perhaps the only detailed account that exists of this entire saga. And Cecil wrote, we were sitting out on the back of our home, which was on a hill surrounded by large mountains, and we saw this light, like a star, rising up from behind a mountain and travel along at a very fast speed. Then it would stop or alter course or reverse, but it could travel slowly or very fast and stop very quickly. And it did its antics in the sky for some time before disappearing. And we were amazed that such events should happen. Dad said it was a dancing star, and off to bed we went. So I can just picture them sitting there outside on their porch or veranda. No TV in 1927, no Netflix, and they were watching this thing. And I also love his father's explanation, a dancing star, whatever that was. And with no additional debate, off to bed. And Cecil continued that he said he could remember the next day. We talked about what we had seen, and really no one could come up with an answer, except that maybe it was in fact a falling star. But we'd seen so many of them to know that that was not the answer. There's a storm going on here at the moment as I'm recording this, and my dog is just reacting to that. So a puzzled family continued on with their daily farm chores. Puzzled, but soon became absorbed in much more earthly matters. Now, it wasn't until the following afternoon, the arrival of the light again permanently and utterly eliminated the possibility of a natural or a man-made explanation to explain what was about to be unleashed upon the McGann family. Now, the 200-acre farm had about 70 or so milking cows and was so docile and gentle, the family really considered them to be pets, peaceful, predictable, and most importantly, a really calm herd of cows. Now, Cecil's sister, Dorothy Middleton, told Bill that they were a beautiful herd of cattle. The farm layout was two day paddocks and 3 night paddocks, and the cows would be routinely located as appropriate. And predictably, so for both family and cows, there was no disruption to the daily routine, ever, until every day at about 3:30 p.m, the herd would slowly wander in for the afternoon milking. And if you've ever been around dairy cows, they will walk up to the dairy by themselves with little or no prompting. Even a call, a couple of dogs can easily guide them to the dairy. But cows will still often just wander up themselves in order to be milked. That is how consistent and predictable the routine on a dairy farm is. So the day after the strange light in the sky had appeared, the herd was coming in much earlier, hours earlier, in fact. The cows were running, sprinting home, mooing, bellowing in absolute terror. Now, Cecil wrote, I shall never forget that day, as we were all amazed at what was happening. The cows were milling around in the yard and bellowing in terror, and with eyes blazing, always looking back into the hills from whence they had come, the day paddock or the day field. What could turn our quiet old cows into such a terror-stricken state? We had no ideas, But I remember with my dad, mum, and younger sisters, we gradually calmed them to settle in a small area around our house. So this is a couple of pictures that Bill has of the property that he had taken, and this one here. So you can see what the countryside is like. It's very hilly, very green area, like that. You can see the mountains in the background, and this is a much older photo going back through time as well. Now, while we're here, I think I'll also show some additional photos of Cecil, so you can get an idea as to who he was. So this was Cecil as a boy. I don't think he's 10 there. He might look a little bit younger than 10 in that particular photo, but that gives you the general idea of 1927 or in the mid 1920s. And this is Cecil as he was interviewed by Bill many years later. And here's a picture of Cecil and Bill together discussing the case. And additionally, another picture of Bill, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago. So that would have been a very fascinating conversation that they had, no doubt. So once the family had calmed the herd down and completed a count of the cows, they realised that one cow was missing, and it was decided that Cecil and his father would go and look for the missing cows in the far back area of the distant day paddock. As they searched the field, they could see the missing cows, and something was far from right about it. The cow was highly agitated, as if it had been terrified beyond its ability to cope. It was totally mentally shot, this one missing cow from the herd. Cecil described the cow as mad, and unfortunately, it had to be shot, as there was no way it was going to return to being a normal, peaceful dairy cow. A lovely member of the herd had to be killed. And Cecil wrote, "We'd seen our strange visitor in the eastern sky for the second night, and we watched it maneuver around the mountains, and it was much brighter at times, but as the night before, it put on quite a show for us, until eventually disappearing behind one of the many mountains." Now, it's interesting to note that the object flew about with impunity, doing whatever it liked, more of its antics, and on for an extended period of time. It was not hiding or sulking in the shadows. This object had no intention of hiding. In fact, more was about to occur. The following day, the milking herd was again not their usual and docile selves. More problems for the McGann family were about to spring forth. There may have been difficulty with depenning them for milking, and perhaps a difficult milk ensued, as dairy farmers sometimes have problems with milking if stock are agitated. Once the milking was completed, the cows refused outright to leave the yards. The cows were not under any urging or incentive. Returned to the big day paddock over the hill and out of sight of the farmhouse. In light of this development, the family decided to let the cows remain in a much smaller day paddock near the house. And the cows seemed happy with this outcome and gradually settled down again, and later were put out for the night, having spent the day in this smaller field. Now, Cecil wrote, "It was as usual on the third night that we looked again into the sky for our dancing star, but it did not appear. And after a while, it was off to bed for a well-earned rest after a long day. But rest was to be short-lived that night because the cattle came home bellowing. Even the dogs howled, and we were out with our kerosene lamps trying to calm them down. Now you can just picture the family out there in nightwear, boots, and with a flickering kerosene lamp and that are smelly, smoky, and waving about as they tried to calm the cows with hushes and "calm down, girls, calm down." Cecil continued, "We could also hear our closest neighbour's cattle bellowing around his yards and could see them with lights trying to find out what was wrong." So this is in the community, not just on the one farm. And he said that we left our kerosene lamps on all night and there was no electricity connected to the house in 1927. And he let the cattle into the area around the house where they milled and bellowed and were shivering with fright. Our normally quiet cattle were panic-stricken. And it must have been something extremely frightening that was unsettling them so much. Wild dogs and dingoes would not trigger an extreme reaction such as this. The family really had a very restless night, and sleep was all but impossible. The next day, they found themselves with another extremely unusual and deeply disturbing mystery. 3 cows were missing. The family was upset at this, and they went to great lengths to find the missing cows. Cecil even walked to the top of the hill in the paddock that the cows had been in, and the mystery only deepened. The 3 cows were lying on the side of a hill in the Big Day paddock. This was the paddock or the field the cows had previously refused to enter on the previous days. Now, Cecil was shocked to discover that all 3 cows were dead. The legs on each beast were badly cut, apparently from crashing through the barbed wire fence that had divided the 2 paddocks from each other. What had scared them so much, enough to crash blindly through fences in sheer panic to get away from an unseen threat, from a most unusual interloper that presumably terrorized the cows to death? The scene of absolute horror, raw terror, was forever etched in Cecil's mind, and he recounted that it was their eyes that scared me, as they seemed to be sticking out of their sockets. Now, that is a truly terrifying image. Had the cows been subjected to some sonic nightmare? Had the cows been forcibly squeezed by some unknown force? Something driving them mad? Stampeding through anything in their path to get away from the source? Had they been lifted and dropped at some point? Perhaps the end of their ordeal? What had caused this distressing and terrible event? The shock loss of 3 beloved cows. As the family was simply the share farmers or the farm's workers, they informed their partner, the cow's owner, who quickly arranged for a local vet from town to inspect the scene. Now, the bush telegraph went into overdrive, and soon the terrible news was heard by all across the district. In fact, many locals came to inspect the dead cows. Lots of possible explanations were offered by all who viewed the carnage. But the vet, who was very astute, quickly ruled out any of the explanations that had been offered. He'd seen enough dead stock to know that this was indeed something different. Cecil forever remembered the vet's comments as he packed up his equipment and stood looking puzzled, and said the only thing that he could think of to say to the family. And he said, "It's funny, but one could nearly say that they were scared to death. But what the hell would scare cattle like that?" the vet said. And the vet was right. Cows are big creatures. Even dogs and dingoes approach them with caution. They are more than able to stample a dog to death. A dingo too. This was something else. Something that could simply not be explained at the time or even today. And as the afternoon wore on, and as the crowd departed, getting confused with the royals, Cecil and his father hauled the dead cows with their trusty draft horse to an area where there was a large pile of dry wood. And they deposited each cow and they burned them all. The smoke and the flames flickered high as the cows burned. The crackle of the fire and the smell of burning cow only served to further stretch the family's growing fears and horror. What was happening in peaceful Fernvale? Cecil remembered, I can remember Dad saying, there's something queer going on. What the hell could be frightening the animals in this way? It appeared that the McGann family was at the centre of the bizarre events, but it soon became apparent that neighbouring farms were also caught up in the terrifying mystery. The family's close neighbour soon admitted that he and his wife had also observed the light moving around the sky on other nights. Cecil recalled, we were awakened one night by a man crying for help. Dad ran down to the bottom of the hill from our house, and the neighbour was in a very bad shape. It appeared that he'd been to a school meeting, and on leaving to walk home, he'd been confronted by what we were told at the time was an apparition, or something that should not be. He spent the night at our place and went home the next morning. Both Mum and Dad were very tight-lipped about the affair, but asked us to look for Mr. Smith's galoshes, which are rubber weather boots, which he had lost when he took off in panic for our place. And so when we went to school the next day, we found the galoshes just a short way down the road from the school. And they were stuck in the mud, just as he had left them the night before, when he had taken off in fright. And in his mad rush to safety, he'd even run past 3 houses along the way to our house. So it's interesting to note the tight-lipped attitude of Cecil's parents after the incident. They perhaps did not wish to scare the children. Perhaps the details of what Mr. Smith had seen was terrifying. He had blindly run past 3 other houses in a mad panic. Just like the cows. No different. The human was reacting in the same manner. Whatever it was beyond all comprehension. 95 years ago, 1927, this is going on. Well before Roswell, well before a lot of other events. Cecil reported that soon after this event, Mr. Smith and his wife left the district entirely, very quickly, never to return. Whatever he had encountered, he was getting as far away as possible, although this was not a stated reason for leaving, but may certainly have been motivation. Cecil continued that several interesting incidents happened during this time that made us really realise that something strange was occurring. I cannot possibly put them in the correct order, as it was so long ago, but at least I remember each event clearly, as they were something that one would never forget. Now, Bill Chalker wrote that Cecil told him he felt that the entire series of bizarre events occurred over a very, very narrow time frame, a matter of weeks. And it was the cattle that was the focus of whatever it was. And Cecil said something was interfering with the cattle. That was upsetting them. The waste mill was used to fatten pigs. And usually we had around 20 pigs of various ages, but always 3 pigs in a special sty getting fattened. And this sty was in a covered area, an open area with feeding through, although surrounded by high railings all around, so the pigs could not get out. The sty was located down a steep hill, so that the top of the wall was high off the ground at the back and almost level with the ground at the front. Now, the pigs being fattened was a large financial investment. Each pig weighed about 200 odd pounds, and the family would fatten them up to about 225 pounds, and then they would sell them. But they were confined in this sty that was very hard for pigs to get out of. And as they were half a share in the pigs, this was significant dollar value to the family. What was to follow would create financial stress on the McGann family's earnings. Now, Cecil wrote, "Going down to feed the pigs one morning during this time, I found 2 of the large fat pigs dead and 1 missing. I called Dad, and we at first thought that they had been killed by dingoes or wild dogs. But when we had a closer look, we realised that there was a lack of blood, though there were puncture wounds around the neck area. But they didn't look like dog bites. Though there were scratches and puncture marks over the body, Dad informed our boss, and he came and looked at them. But he was more interested in the missing pig, as there was no sign of it breaking out of the sty. All that could be done was clean up the scene of carnage. The 2 remaining dead pigs were burned on a bonfire, similar to the unfortunate cows. The rest of the day was spent looking for the missing pig, but this was entirely unsuccessful. And that afternoon, the cows were restless, as they had been since the strange happenings had started. Now, some of the cows gathered near a spot, 150 yards up a steep incline, close to the cow yards. As Cecil watched, the cows were bellowing and pawing at the ground, stamping. This smaller group gradually became the entire herd, as the cows all joined together in this one area in an absolute frenzy. The family struggled to move the cows away from this area, but once they had done this, the reason for the frenzy became apparent. The cows had been pawing and bellowing at a large blood patch on the ground, a patch of grass covered in blood. Now, Cecil's dad contacted the farm's owner, and he again called in the vet, who confirmed perhaps what they had expected. The bloody patch on the grass was in fact pig's blood. There were samples of hair matching the missing pig, were mixed in with the bloody mess, red and contrasting heavily on the green lush grass. The stench of death was present for all to feel uneasy. The bigger questions on everybody's minds were, where is the pig carcass? What could have killed a 220-pound pig in this manner? What could have lifted it out of the sty? What could have taken it up a very steep slope? What could have removed the remains of a heavy pig completely from the ground? And Cecil wrote, "We just had to accept the fact that something sinister was going on around the place. But there was more to come before we were to see the last of the unexpected visitors." Now, at that time, Cecil used to sleep on an open veranda near the front steps of the house, where one of the family's favourite dogs slept. And this dog was an excellent, sharp, and vigilant watchdog. Cecil wrote, "So one always slept contented in the knowledge that one was well guarded, even though no one ever bothered to interfere with any homes. In those days, windows and doors were never closed or locked." However, one night, Cecil was awoken by a strange noise, something that he'd never heard before, nor since. This sound was disturbingly different from the normal nighttime sounds that rocked him to sleep every night. The sound was a rump sound, and it sounded like one was answering the other. As the sound echoed in his ear, and this call and return went on for a long time. Cecil noticed that his vigilant watchdog was nowhere to be seen, and Cecil leapt out of bed and awoke his parents. His father stood on the porch, straining to hear. But the noise had ceased. The family decided this was the imagination of an overactive 10-year-old and dismissed the event. But Cecil knew that he'd heard something odd. And the dog, where was his faithful guardian during that time? But vindication was at hand. The following night, the noise was back again. This time, much louder, and Cecil's parents heard it too. Cecil noticed that both his parents were distressed and nervous as they stared, troubled, out into the darkness. The night was closing in around them as the clear rump sound assaulted them. Rump. And I'm sure I'm not doing that rumping any justice, but that was the general sound. Cecil wrote that both parents were nervous, especially Dad, who had lived in the bush all his life, but said he had never heard anything like it. And he helped me move my bed into their room. All the time, this incessant noise kept up, and it seemed to be getting closer. The rumping sound. There seemed to be one here and one there. They were not all together. It sounded like 3 or 4 of them. It was shocking. It was rump, 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 like that. This was a truly nightmare situation for the family. The terrified family took the steps to close all the windows and doors. The dogs did not answer any calls made, no matter how commanding or soft. The cows were nowhere to be seen. Normally they rested peacefully near the house, close to their caring masters. Something strange was in the air. A curse was upon the land. The family felt like their entire world was under assault, but the rest of the night passed by. The clock ticked slowly. Nothing else happened, but sleep was hard to find. Now, the following day, Cecil's mother noticed that both the front and rear door of the house was open when she got up. Now, the family had securely closed both doors the previous night. Everything else seemed to be normal. Nothing else visibly interfered with or missing. Just that unsettling feeling that the house had been breached during the night. Their sanctuary could be interfered with. Safety was a concern. What was doing this to them? The family got on with their day. Chores had to be done. In fact, on a farm, they are never ending. But when they returned to the house, Cecil's mother revealed that something had in fact gone through the house the previous night as they all slept. She had seen footprints, muddy from the mud near the front steps. The steps went right through the house. The footprints looked like the tread from a rubber boot. However, no heel mark was left on any print. Cecil's mother kept the house sharply clean and had in fact mopped up the marks before the family awoke, but she could not maintain her secret. It was just all too disturbing for her. The family was completely puzzled. How could anyone or anything get past the dogs that slept at both doors every night? How? Those dogs would go crazy if anyone or anything approached. But as suddenly as it began, it was all over. And Cecil recounted, the strange thing about it was that we never heard the noise anymore in the night, and things seemed to become normal again, although the cattle would still not go to the back paddock, nor would the dogs move from around the farm buildings. We still saw our light in the sky occasionally, always moving from the northeast to a southeast direction in an erratic manner. As things quietened down on the farm, no effort was made to watch the light to any extent. I find that amazing. I'd be out there watching that light for as long as it was there night after night. But These people are not UFO enthusiasts. Now, by this time, Cecil's older brother Tom had returned to the farm. And one night, they visited the neighbours for an evening of fun and card playing. This was an uneventful and enjoyable evening. But when it was time to go home, by lantern light across the flat, going over the fence that divided the properties and negotiating 3 creeks and a good hill, that the strange and bizarre entered the family's lives again. As Cecil and Tom had just entered their own farm over the fence and within sight of the warm and welcoming lights of home, they noticed a light approaching from the south. The light was similar to the moon, but it increased in size as it approached the 2 boys walking carefully across the field. Cecil recalled, "It got nearer until it was over our heads, and there it was, a large, round, dull light, which seemed to be beneath a round, cylinder-shaped object with a dome on top as it passed overhead. We were able to get a good view of it for a brief moment before it suddenly started to hiss, and it lit up with a dazzling light, which lit up the whole area just like day, and then it turned slightly and moved towards our back paddock to where it came to a rest on a hill just inside our neighbour's property." My brother said, "It must have been a falling star, but we were puzzled as to how slow it had travelled, and also that it had travelled down between 2 hills to pass over our heads and then alter course. But we decided to wait until morning, go out and see what it really was." The following morning, they walked to the back field and found a brown area in the green grass where the mystery object had landed, touched down. The grass was described as scorched and 30 feet in diameter, reasonably large. The neighbours soon turned up and confirmed that they too had seen the object. They were watching that the boys got home safely and also saw the strange object, especially when it lit up the farms like daylight with its startlingly and bright lights. The neighbours saw it land and reported that the object had glowed for a considerable time after it had landed, eventually dimming completely, and the area was descended back into darkness. And again, news travelled very quickly across the district. Many people came to observe this landing location, marvelling at the scorched earth and green grass contrasting each other. Cecil said that none ever suspected that such things existed. And of course, it wasn't until many years later that the presence of UFOs was suspected or became known. And so although a lot of theories were put forward as to what it may have been, there was very little thought given to it afterwards. And I guess except for the ones who actually saw it, it was soon completely forgotten. But to me, it was and still is an episode of my life that was instilled in my memory through the spine-chilling events over the period of its stay. It seemed that we were singled out to become the victims of either tests or experiments. It would be foolish not to realise that the craft was under control and manned as it wound its way in between the mountains and the hills to finally come to rest. It appeared that things culminated after the night we saw it land. That was the finish of it. However, there were other things that happened at this time that deepened the bizarre nature of the mystery. Now, Cecil goes on to describe another startling observation. It was on my way to school that I first got a glimpse of a huge bird, which in my opinion was well over 5 feet high, and it was on a limb of a big dead tree near our school. Its plumage shone in the morning sun, and it stood erect, the same as a penguin. It did not stand like a normal bird. I saw it for a couple of minutes. It was stationary, it did not move. As he was expected in class, Cecil hurried off to school, told his teacher. When they came out, the mysterious bird was gone. When Cecil told his parents about what he had seen, when he got home, the mystery was increased. His parents revealed that it was in fact a big bird that had terrified Mr. Smith, and it appeared Mr. Smith saw something come out of the darkness. The apparition turned out to be a huge bird on the ground. It had flapped its wings towards the terrified Mr. Smith, who promptly left his gumboots behind and sprinted up the road. In light of this revelation, perhaps the bird was responsible for the unknown noises. There had been a strong bird smell when the noises had taken place, it was recalled, and Cecil had found two big feathers 2 to 3 feet long, a short distance from the house. Cecil said they were not feathers from any bird I'd ever seen. They were a speckly type of feather. I don't think there was much colour attached to them that I can remember. In fact, it later became apparent there were other sightings of giant birds. Cecil and his brother were returning home in daylight this time, when they heard laughing and talking. When we looked up, we saw the noise was coming from 2 giant birds soaring overhead. They were much bigger than any bird we'd ever seen. They seemed to be gliding with wings outstretched. The wingspan was bigger than the length of the body. The birds were 3 to 4 times bigger than a wedge-tailed eagle, the biggest bird found naturally in that area. They were monsters, making sounds like unintelligible conversation. Now, Cecil's sister Dorothy recalled their other sister and one of the parents had gone out onto the veranda one night and observed this bird hopping down the hill with its wings flapping, a huge, big bird. On another night, they witnessed a dull type of light, a round thing, go across their field of view, and it took some time to cross, Dorothy said. Now, the following incident, reported by Cecil to Bill Chalker, is yet another strange dimension to this entire saga. One night, the family had visited the neighbours, and Tom remained at the McGann's family home, not joining the rest of them in the visit to the neighbours. While at the neighbour's house, the rest of the family witnessed the arrival of a white-suited figure, a strange man. Now, as this was a gathering of several families, everyone assumed the strange man had arrived with another family, as an invited guest or the guest of a guest. The strange man in the white suit did not talk to anyone and left the party fairly quickly. Meanwhile, back at the McGann house, Tom was in bed, lying in the darkness, when he heard a noise in the house and shouted, "Who's there?" And Tom bravely got out of bed and just in time to see someone in a white suit disappearing quickly into the darkness. How had this stranger visited both houses in pitch darkness with no light, crossed 2 creeks that were unpassable unless you knew where some planks were specifically located, and a large stream that could only be passed crossing a particular fallen tree, and all of this in pitch darkness? Cecil concluded his letter to Bill with the following statement. I could probably fill in another 2 pages on this, but I won't, you see, because I'll only speak about what I can actually verify as the whole truth and nothing but the truth. There's things that happened at that time that I will not, and nobody will ever get me to talk about, because I'm not sure. I only speak about things I'm sure about. I'll write it all down, and if anything ever happens to me, you can have it. I think you will outlive me. I'll just put your name and address on it and leave it to you. If anything goes wrong, you can have it. Then you won't be able to come along and pick me to pieces on it. And in 1999, Bill received another letter from Cecil entitled Terror on the Tweed, My Story in Full. And in this letter, he described things he had not originally revealed to Bill because he was uncertain of them. And he revealed some interesting further additions. Cecil revealed that as he looked for the missing cows, he saw 2 objects, one down on a small flat at the bottom of a ridge and the other amongst bushes halfway down the ridge. And they were moving about and looked like small elephants, but could have been wearing some type of spacesuit. It all caused quite a laugh when he got back and told the family about these 2 strange things he had seen out in the field. On the night they found the dead cows around midnight, they heard a car coming onto the property from the main road. Now, Cecil pointed out that none of our neighbours at the time had cars, nor did any other people that they knew, as they all used horses and sulkies. And they all got out of bed and went out into the pitch dark to see who it could be. And the car progressed down the hill and over the creek and up the hill to around the side of the house. And somebody opened the gate, and it proceeded on where there was no road, went past our shed and down to a gate into the cow yard. It went through that gate, down through the cow yard and through a gate at the bottom, and continued on until it stopped and turned its lights off. After about 10 minutes, it turned around and came back, closing all the gates as they came. And when they got to where we were, the family sang out to them, but got no reply as they drove off, out onto the road and away. A very strange event, as how did they know how to open the gates so easily, as they all had different catches on them, so that the horses could not open them, but it seemed too easy. There seemed to be 2 occupants in the car, but it was hard to tell that for sure. Cecil also revealed that when they found the mad cow, which they had shot, they also found a pig, which was mad as well, and they killed it too. It was not one of their pigs, and after inquiries, no one else was missing a pig. Cecil also revealed a large swelling had come up onto his groin like a huge boil with a yellow top on it, and he became very sick and was taken to the hospital, where he was diagnosed as having yellow jaundice and rheumatic fever. And as he lay in the hospital for a long time and got no better, he was taken home, as the doctors could really do nothing for him. And he was taken home basically to die. Now, the cattle inspector, who was a good friend, called in and could not find Cecil. He went down to the dairy to tell the family, and they found Cecil in a large wardrobe, which meant that he could walk again, and he was on the road to recovery. It was strange that this illness had occurred straight after the night of the strange noises the family had heard at night. Cecil was also struck by the fact that there was 2 of each, 2 birds, 2 men, 2 in spacesuits, possibly 2 men in white suits as well. So this was a very, very strange series of events. And I'm going to show you just another couple of pictures. So we've got here just a snapshot of the letter that he had written to Bill. That's his handwriting there. And this is also illustrations of what this mysterious bird-like figure looked like. And it draws those comparisons to the Mothman prophecies, this large cryptid-type unusual bird that seemed to be able to talk or chatter with another bird of the same type in some unknown language as it flew above the men. It was really very, very strange. So the events that took place in Fernvale 1927 should always be remembered as a very sinister time when something mysterious, multiple mysterious things occurred. Stock was terrified and frightened. The family was frightened. And it really has that undertone of a lot of modern themes come out in this as well. So you can almost have the comparisons of Men in Black with that car turning up and strangely negotiating its way out into the paddock and back again. You've got animals terrified, soaked blood on the ground. You've got mysterious men in white suits appearing randomly and disappearing. You've got a low descending UFO coming in over, landing in the back paddock. So it really is an extraordinary series of events that Bill Chalker was able to preserve for us. And I appreciate the efforts that he's done, and I appreciate the help that he's giving me by sharing his article and photographs for this particular episode. So I really hope that you found this as equally fascinating as I have. And in fact, I plan to make a video on this particular encounter as well, because there is nothing out there that documents it in that way. So I'll let you know when that is finished, when I get a chance to complete that. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. It's always a pleasure to be here with you. I hope you enjoyed sharing the Fernvale story with me, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Good night.